now officially on the record. How are you, Jim?
I'm good. How are you today?
Not too bad. This is the second video in what, 48 hours?
Who's counting?
Yeah, well, I am because I actually have to edit these things. So I am, yes, second video in 48 hours, and I've not edited the first one yet, but I will, I promise. But I want to thank you. This is going to be a little bit different from our normal recording session. So I'm excited by this, and everybody will find out, if they don't already know who you are, which they should, who you are and why you're on the channel. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Welcome back, or welcome to Did You Know That? Question mark. The interview channel where I get to talk to interesting people about interesting and sometimes annoying topics. And this one's going to be very interesting because Jim and I go way back, both in terms of being cohorts in cyber and also being video buddies as of 2020. And so for those of you who are coming back, thank you again for your patronage. For those of you just joining us, it'd be great if you hit subscribe with the bell so you get notified when new content is posted every Thursday. Also, to make sure you guys leave a like, because you're going to like this video because it does help the channel. My name is Sean O'Rourke, and when I'm not talking to interesting people, I'm actually a cyber liability consultant for an insurance brokerage firm in New York City. And Jim, why don't you tell the fine folks who you are and what you do?
Thanks, Sean. Jim Matola. I'm Vice President for Data Privacy, Security, and Investigations of Corsia Compliance Services. We are a boutique investigative and security company. We handle people's problems. Very similar to what I did for 26 years before that, working for the U.S. government as a special agent with the U.S. Secret Service. So I've been in private practice for 7 years now, and it's been a very interesting period of time.
Well, it's your governmental career is why you're here, because that's what I wanted to focus on, and then we'll talk about what you do now in the private sector. But Secret Service holds a lot of different positions that I think, and responsibilities that people don't really know about, and so we'll talk about that. But my first question is how did you wind up in the Secret Service?
Now that's a question most people ask, and then when you get in the Secret Service, sometimes you say, "How am I going to get out?" But 25 years and 10 months is a long time, and it goes very fast. Honestly, the reason I went to the Secret Service because it really attracted me, really the people, right? The esprit de corps, if you will, the very focused mission, and I felt that it was a good fit for me professionally. I've always wanted to serve our country, and this was, I was super fortunate to be able to join the Secret Service when I was 23 years old. Very, very young, and I can't imagine right now what the 23-year-old me was thinking and how I got in. But we were just very lucky. A group of us were very lucky to get hired almost a year or two out of college. So, I had some friends and relatives that were working with other agencies and had worked with the Secret Service, and they introduced me to some agents, and I did some research. So take a test, you do a very extensive background and polygraph, and it takes a little while to get hired, but for me, it was a focus of law enforcement that I was interested in serving the country. And of course, a big part of it too was being able to travel. And I've been quite a few places, but I say there's probably more places I haven't been than I have been. But it was a real opportunity for me to travel and use some of my interest in training and language as well. So I think that answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, so you weren't necessarily targeting the Secret Service, but you did have an idea that you wanted to be in some sort of form of government service, and you preferred law enforcement.
Yeah, I looked at various armed services, and specifically, I was looking for something more in intelligence.
Yeah.
And that just, there's different requirements for different agencies, and that really, I had an opportunity with the Air Force, but I decided not to take that. It wasn't exactly what I was looking to do. So I kind of focused towards investigations, which really kind of had been really what I was interested in even through college. And I'd like to think I'm pretty good at investigations,
Mhm.
but it was something that, that was interesting to me. And the Secret Service has a dual mission of investigations and protection. At
Right.
that time, when I was hired, we were at the Treasury Department. So a lot of financial fraud investigations, which is really are interesting crimes. And we can talk a little bit about that as well. And also protection of the president, vice president, their families, as well as various heads of state. So it's an organization that's very international. It's very small. At that time, they got hired, it was about 22 agents worldwide. So you get to know everybody, and really develop your craft with a lot of seasoned veterans and in lots of challenging situations at a very early onset in your career. You're giving a lot of responsibility. You have to really
Right.
be able to think on your feet. And that to me is this kind of the structure that I liked, rather than maybe a more robust bureaucratic structure. But
Mhm.
it was a good fit for me.
So to that end, was your career typical? Was your career extraordinary, atypical in terms of where do you
Mm,
start and then how do you wind up where you wound up? Because one of the reasons we met is because of what you ended up doing toward the end of your career in the Secret Service. So
yeah,
how does that evolution happen
yeah, it's
when you
you
come
know
in?
it's very interesting because the service, I think, is very entrepreneurial. When you think about the world of federal law enforcement, it's pretty competitive.
Mhm.
When you're looking at various cases that are interesting, that will probably that will give your agency some real notoriety. And really, the reason you do that is because we're all fighting for government funding, right? You're all
Right.
it's and
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 personnel.
and personnel, and
Yeah.
funding is important. Personnel, because you can't grow unless you have people. You can't, if you don't have people, you can't grow. So, when I came on the service, really on an investigative standpoint, was really had been focusing on counterfeit currency. They're the only agency that is authorized to investigate counterfeit currency. However, back in the late 80s and early 90s, credit card fraud had been something that the Secret Service picked up. Not that they had sole jurisdiction over it, right? But credit card fraud and electronic payment systems and bank fraud was something that the service was starting to work on.
Mhm.
However, let's think about credit card fraud in the late 80s, early 90s, right? We're talking, it's a paper-based system, but there also was technology behind it, right? Things like credit reports
Right.
could be accessed via phone lines, right? Computers with cradles on top. You would
Yeah.
probably dial up, right? The
Yeah.
kind of things that you were probably hacking away at in your bedroom. Back in
Actually, I had a cassette because my first computer was a Commodore VIC-20 and it came with a cassette.
uh,
So
yeah, as we used to say, "Hey kid, drop the Cocoa Puffs," because because that's because really. So if you think about the evolution of payment systems
right.
and data, right? The service has to evolve and adapt along with the criminals and what they're doing and how they are exploiting vulnerabilities in all those systems to obtain something of value, generally a person's identification, a credit card number, a bank account, etc. So that evolution goes from paper-based checks and currency to all the way to where we are right now with digital currencies.
Right.
So it's really kind of been neat to have been at the cusp of this and watch it happen over 25 years as a career.
Well, you and I are around the same age, so you remember. At least I remember my mom taking me to buy clothes or sneakers or shoes or what have you. She would give the credit card. They would put the credit card in a machine, put a carbon copy
Mm-hmm.
sheet over it, and then go back and forth on it and make an impression of the credit card. And then those stores had to submit those physically to have them processed, and then you'd go through. So for those who have never known anything besides technology, there was a world before that was quite manual and quite different from what we live in today.
Yeah, those knuckle busters, man.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Right.
invariably somebody would come home and their the front of their knuckles would be all skinned up
Right.
from doing that all day.
And if you look at credit cards back then, right, it was counterfeit credit cards, right?
Yeah.
Counterfeit cards that were embossed on the front with a name. And then there was that, the I guess I'll call it technology, but the mag stripe.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
That was the first. Yeah.
That held some data in it, right? But it was very rudimentary and it could be compromised. So I remember working early cases where you'd actually have a mag stripe reader and you'd see if the mag stripe reader matched what was on the front of the card. So, counterfeit credit cards, but really those types of crimes, the data had come from someplace.
Right.
Right. So you think about dumpster diving, right? Like going in the trash.
Yeah, looking for old statements and whatnot.
Looking for old statements. People didn't shred their statements. They can't, people used to break into mailboxes, all those types of things. It was a paper-based society with a digital back end.
Right.
And now we're probably almost the other way around. It's a digital society with people using paper for people who prefer to use paper.
Right.
So anyway.
So all right. So you're 23 years old.
Mm-hmm.
What's your first year like with the Secret Service?
So the first year a lot of training. All right. So I started in the New York field office, the 6 World Trade Center, and there for a couple of weeks, learning how to do the basic paperwork. But then it's I think it was 9 and then 13 weeks of training, 2 different training academies, one down Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, where every Treasury agency did your basic police training, if you will. You learn about laws and handcuffs and control tactics and things like that. And then after that, you go to the Secret Service Academy, which when I was there was mostly in Washington D.C. or the training center had in Laurel, Maryland, had just kind of started. It was a building or two, which is interesting because eventually in my career, I went back as an instructor, and it was a very, very different. The service grew, the training grew, got more sophisticated, more focused.
Right.
So the first year, a lot of training. And then a lot of assignments where you're doing, things like you're working Treasury check investigations, right? Checks used to be mailed, they still are, to various places around. And I worked in the Bronx and in Brooklyn, and you would go and investigate those cases, which is a good basis, really, if you're going to work fraud, because obviously there is a physical transaction, right? I have to work with banks, financial institutions. And you get to learn things about handwriting and fingerprinting. So it's a good way to learn how to really investigate financial fraud cases. And of course, we had police powers and carried weapons, so we various arrests and whatnot. And so that the first year you do that, and then of course you're doing a lot of traveling to support presidential assignments throughout the country, throughout the world, where you show up a day or two beforehand, and you're part of a team that's securing an area. You may be standing outside at a checkpoint or something like that. And then of course with the UN General Assembly, very busy, New York, it's a very busy time. So, maybe you're the command post agent, you have radios, and you're the person that sets up that command post, and you're there all day long, and hours at the Waldorf and the Continental and all the hotels that I spent lots of time standing around in. So that's the first year, pretty much.
So I smiled when you say the UN General Council, Assembly, because there is one positive to all of the COVID chaos here in New York City, is that there was no General Assembly last year. So traffic around the east side of Manhattan and whatnot was beautiful,
Yeah.
because that's 1 week of the year where everybody hates being in Manhattan, or at least top level Manhattan, because the security, the traffic is just so overwhelming, even by New York City standards. It's incredible. So, were you on? Does everybody get assigned presidential detail, or is that just for specific agents? And if so, how do you actually get on a presidential detail?
Yeah, I think at that time there was a progression, right? And you asked an ordinary or atypical career path, right? And, for the agents that started, I believe, after 1986, they were on a 25-year career path. It was a different retirement system, right? So agents prior to that were 20 years, 20, 20, and it makes a big difference. Yeah, I know it's 5 years, but it does make a big difference, I think, in your perspective. And I think a lot of the agents we hired, probably from the late 80s, early 90s on, were younger. Typically, I think a lot of the agents that were hired were former, Vietnam veterans, or police officers,
Right.
and they were older guys that were probably a little bit older, in their late 20s, early 30s. You start hiring younger people, it's a longer kind of runway. So for 25 years career, you look at, it was, you would spend 5 to 7 years in your first office. Well, I actually spent 4 years in the New York field office, and then I took a transfer to Arizona, to Phoenix for 2.5 years. It was an opportunity. This is going to sound crazy. I had just put a down payment on a condo in Lower Manhattan, and they could not get minimum occupancy, so they gave me my money back.
Okay.
Right. So I'm sure that apartment is probably worth about, I don't know, 10 to 20.
I'm not even going to tell you.
I don't even want to know right now,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So we moved went to Arizona, because at that point, it was an opportunity to do something different, go someplace different. I had gone to college in California, so I had not always been in New York, New Jersey. And that was an interesting opportunity, because we went from working basically the New York field office of the Secret Service works the 5 boroughs, right, of New York. In Arizona, we worked 3/4 of the state. In New York, we had 150 agents. In Arizona, we had 8.
Whew.
Okay. And a lot of it's government property as well. So it's your car, and you're just driving for hours, out in the desert or the High Sierra. For me, it was a great experience. They really helped me learn a lot about working with local law enforcement. We did that in the New York office, but we didn't do as much because we were pretty self-contained, right? And when you're one person in a county and you need some help, you have to talk to your local law enforcement folks. And so that was an interesting experience. But so generally, the first 5 to 7 years, you're in your first assignment, and then from there, typically you have a preference, but not always do you get selected for that preference. And this is the thing about working in the government. I think it's like they say, it's a volunteer army. I mean, it was your choice, and sometimes you don't get the assignments you want. A lot of it comes down to timing, as well as a need as well, right? I mean, it comes down to timing.
Yeah.
And you would think that your preference or your experience and your reputation might carry you to the next assignment. I was fortunate. I did work for Presidential Protective Division for almost 5 years under President Clinton at the end of his first and through his second administration.
Oh, the real interesting times.
It's always, everything is interesting, and the interesting thing is when we got there, they told us it was a 3-year assignment.
And it turned into 5?
5. And it was, his travel schedule, you look at it today and you're thinking, that's about the way everybody travels, right? I mean, but compared to, President Bush and President Reagan, who didn't travel a lot, right? President Clinton traveled quite a bit. And it would be, he would be going to Africa. Okay, 8 countries, 10 cities. That has a lot to lay on. It's a lot of moving parts. so it really challenged me personally and professionally. And of those 5 years, I spent roughly, I think I spent 2.5 years away from home, right? And I think I spent almost a year of those 5 years out of the country.
Well, and I knew that because you and I have talked
Right.
so often about that. So in that respect, I mean, Clinton probably traveled because he liked international politics a lot, but also international politics grew
Yeah.
within the 80s and the 90s, especially the 90s after the fall of the Soviet Union. And then all of a sudden things freed up in that
Yeah.
regard. So
Sure.
where did you go? Where did you go during those 5 years outside of the United States?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to keep track. As a matter of fact, before I retired, I asked for all of my travel vouchers because I didn't write anything down. I'm not one of these note takers,
Right.
and I still have yet to go through them all. But I mean, Central and South America, quite a bit, Asia, quite a bit, Africa, quite a bit, and I was in Africa 3 or 4 times. It's just really interesting stuff. So like you said, the summits, right? There are lots of summits at that point in time. And I think that's where a lot of the travel did come from, with those types. So you'd go to a summit let's suppose there was a summit in Tokyo. Then there's other stops that they do along the way as well. So quite a few trips, and and of course, you can't forget that the '96 campaign. We got there just before the campaign started, and it was super busy. I mean, campaigns are just amazing, in the fact that they're doing so many trips a day. And 1992, I was on then VP nominee Gore's his protective detail when he was when they were running the first time. You'd hit 6 or 7 states in one day.
Right.
And it's funny, when the weather map pops up, right? I look and I go, oh, Paducah, been there. It's just that there's places there's places you wouldn't go. There's places, right? That I did a stop there. I mean, when I go to the airport, I go and I look at the arrivals and departures. And I'm like, okay, been there. Had not been there. Okay. And it's just kind of a funny thing. You just kind of check them off.
Well, and let me stop you there for a second. So because were you when Clinton would take these trips, were you advance team? Did you travel with him? Who got to ride on Air Force One? Who had to go in advance? So on and so forth. Where did that fall in your career? And then how did that impact what your responsibilities were?
Right, and I think there's some great documentaries on National Geographic about this, and they break them down. And I tell you, I typically don't watch that kind of stuff, but I have to tell you, they were very well done. Yeah, there's an advanced team, and and again, everything I'm telling right here is all public knowledge. There's nothing here that's classified or otherwise shouldn't be talked about. So,
or else we'd have to kill all our listeners. So.
We may just keep on talking. They may just kill them anyway. But at the end of the day, again, so because we are under law. There's certain things we can and can't talk about. But and I of course for me it's important that we do that. And anyway, it's part of what we need to be is worthy of trust and confidence. And that means you're going to be in close proximity to somebody and you don't need to repeat what they're saying.
Yeah.
It's not,
that's why we're not going to go there. That's why we're just focused on you.
You're not that special. Just stand there.
Yeah.
But at the end, so yeah, advanced trips. I did a lot of advanced. I did really like the advance because on an advanced trip, if it's domestically, you get to show up a week before. Right, and you get to meet the police and the local field office, as well as the host committee and the staff and the White House Communications Agency. And you really get to develop these working relationships of every week doing these things. And you're on a finite time schedule. You know, just because you're not ready doesn't mean he or she is not going to show up. So
Yeah.
you've got to make things happen quickly, and you've got competing interests always,
Yes.
right?
Oh yeah. I mean,
Right.
because this is still politics.
It's politics, and,
Yeah.
and the staff wants maximum exposure, and we want minimum exposure.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I mean, physically on time, you know, exposure. So, you know, that's always the trade-off back and forth. And you have to keep in mind threats that they're happening, and some are some kind of a, you know, they're unknown at times. They're not so specific. You know, intelligence is kind of like chatter. You have to piece it together, and sometimes it makes sense, and sometimes it doesn't. So you have to always be vigilant. When you're going on a foreign trip, it would be 2.5 weeks before they got there. And that gives you some time to acclimate. And of course, when you're working with foreign governments and with the State Department, things just take twice as long to get done overseas. I don't care if it's government or business work, it just takes longer. There's language, customs, protocols, you know, and you have to be sensitive to that as well. So I did
what
a
kind
lot.
of authority did you have when you were overseas in terms of, hey, I don't like this area, or if we're going to go to this area, then we need to situate our security as such. How much were you able to dictate that?
You know, those things are always it's a discussion, you know, and I think all between the staff, the president's staff, the service, you know, everybody had limitations on what was acceptable and not acceptable. And I think we, working together, our relation, you would know people by their first names, and every trip would be assigned a lead from the staff, from the service, from the White House Communications Agency, right? You would get to know everybody very well, and you knew each other's protocols. You knew things that were acceptable or not acceptable, or things that would warrant kind of, I would say, mitigation or adjudication. And I have to tell you, very rarely did that ever really surface where there was a, you know, knockdown, drag out fight. And honestly, we all had supervisors in chain of command. And if something didn't seem typical, you know, I would just push it up the chain of command. And you know, and that's, so you don't fight over things. You work things out. It's cooperation. And, you know, and that's kind of, you know, we all were under a lot of pressure to do our jobs. Right. And I think, and we all understood that. And there was give and take. And there was, you know, there's always going to be, you know, some pushing and shoving. But honestly, everybody got along. And I think we all learned that at the end of the day, our success was their success, and their success was our success.
So as part of the advanced team, when you were going overseas, did you just hit, now you mentioned it before, that overseas trips were not usually, okay, one and done. They hit multiple areas. So are there multiple advanced teams, or are you hitting, okay, they're going to be here in 2.5 weeks, and then we're going to jump from here and we're going to go to the next stop where they're going to be a couple of days later and what have you? Or were there multiple teams sent out ahead of time?
Yeah, generally, if you think about it, if the trip may be a week for the protectee, right? Leave on Saturday, come back the next Saturday. Well, you can't roll up, you know, the time frame. Very few times that I roll from one trip advanced team to another within like one period of time for a particular foreign trip.
Right.
It just takes. But if you're in support, like, so vehicles, right? So vehicles or people, you know, they may hit the first leg of the trip and the last leg of the trip, because it's not so important that, you know, people or support staff is there in you know, 7 or 14 days in advance. So, but
Gotcha.
there were times where we were on a trip and you may be in, I don't know, let's just say Toledo, okay? And there may be a situation where, hey, look, you guys are done tomorrow, but we need you to roll to I don't know, Topeka, right? Because there's a funeral or there's something else going on. So you would roll to it domestically. Sometimes you would, and on a campaign, you often did from one trip to another. So
Yeah.
you could be out, hey, just eat pack for 2-3 weeks sometimes because you didn't know when you were going to come back. And, if you were lucky enough to find a hotel that did laundry,
It's so funny. I was just about to say that. I said, I guess you learned to do laundry on the fly pretty well.
you carry a lot of stuff, and your bags. And that's the whole thing, dragging bags, man, before they give that wheels. So,
well, as an advanced team, did you fly commercial or was it a government aircraft?
Yeah, we flew commercial. Yeah.
So, well, then that leads me to a segue because all we've talked about was pre 9/11. How did your career change after 9/11?
Yeah, during 9/11, I was an instructor in training. And we pretty much held sat tight because, operationally, there's so many things that have to happen in an organization that the guys you see standing in front of the cars and doing that. Oops, I'll get back to it. Sorry about that.
Where'd you go, Jim?
Hey, the guys that are standing in front of cars and working, with the president, vice president, first family, what have you. They're operational, but there's lots of things that need to happen in the background, the support, right? I mean, and so, post 9/11, I actually transferred to the Newark office in 2002. And it was a very different world, obviously, then. There was a lot of cooperation with FBI and other agencies. The Joint Terrorist Task Force kind of took off at that time. And so it seemed like a more coordinated focus really on terrorists and terrorism, And so we would take the skill sets that we knew, which were financial crimes, which, that's a lot of times crime is finances other things.
Sure.
So credit card fraud and things like that. So everybody kind of had a skin in the game now. And we were very focused, and there was a lot of cooperation, especially here in northern New Jersey, especially between New York and New Jersey as well. So it was different, but again, the mission continued, and I think things were much more coordinated at that point from a federal level.
So where in the hierarchy of federal assignments, where's the Secret Service now? Is it still under Treasury or has it been moved?
Well, that's a great question, and I completely forgot.
Fair enough. And guess what? Everybody can Google it right now.
You asked me after 9/11, after crying out loud. Yes, we actually then became part of the Department of Homeland Security.
Okay.
Did that change us? It changed some of the things that it didn't change our mission. It may have changed our focus a little bit, again, as one of the 23 or 24 agencies under DHS. Other agencies had a much more difficult time as Customs and I guess it was U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, or there's a few agencies that actually Immigration and Customs were two different agencies. See, it's been so long shot. They were two different agencies, and they basically split those agencies in half and then put them back together again. That was interesting, and of course TSA right at the airports. So I remember just after 9/11 that we were on a team that did some surveys at airports, because physical security is something that we're very good at. And so we did some physical security assessments at airports. That was pre-TSA. And obviously, I think TSA was a great idea. And it's a heck of a thing to stand up. And I give everybody credit who was able to start a new agency in the middle of something like that.
Yeah. Because if people don't remember, it was a frenetic couple of years. Outside of the wars and what have you, but even domestically, it was frenetic in terms. And I guess from the inside, I mean, it might have been just a blur, because for those of us on the outside, there was a lot of stuff going on.
As an agency, I don't think we were operationally as affected. Being one or two, criminal investigative agencies in a department, it's a little bit easier to garner resources. In DHS, you've got 23, 24 agencies who have all varied missions, and the resources they need are significantly greater. Look at the Coast Guard.
Yeah.
I mean, helicopters, airplanes, boats. The Secret Service, we didn't have any of those. We had, our biggest expenses were probably sometimes personnel, right? And probably, some of the limousines and things like that. But so it became a little different for us. But I think, the agency has done a very good job staying true to its mission. And to me, so it never really seemed that much of a difference to me. Operate on the operational end.
So let's sort of fast forward a little bit and talk about how you wound up in cyber with the Secret Service, because that was your last sort of role, correct, before you retired?
Yeah. So I, for me, I my 25-year career, I spent 5 years in protective operations and 2 years in training, right, as an instructor in our training division. And so the other, 19, 18 years, the balance of that was under the Office of Investigations. Right, kind of where I really, my sweet spot and what I really, really enjoy. Not that protection wasn't challenging and rewarding. It's a different thing, right? So, and honestly, you never stop doing protection. You're always, even if you're a field agent doing investigations, you're always doing protection. You're breaking, traveling here, traveling there, supervising it, what have you. All right, so you never get away from that. And I think having both gives you an appreciation of each, helps you develop different skill sets, and I think it keeps things fresh as well.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, it's a nice mix. It really is. But as far as investigations, early in the 90s, I was working financial fraud cases, counterfeit fraud cases, and I remember getting a phone call about some computer equipment that was being delivered to a location. At the end of the day, we found out that someone had been hacking into, the credit bureaus, and using credit card numbers. And then we'd have situations where we had, real estate agencies were printing out credit card report or credit reports. And so a lot of it was this credit card fraud, but the data aggregation was coming either from hacking, right, or from some retail establishment or compromise. And we talked about dumpster diving.
Sure.
So those, so I would say even as early as the early 90s, we were working cyber cases. They weren't, I guess we were calling it electronic fraud at that time,
right?
But it was an emerging area, at that time. And a lot of the criminals were domestic. So, and then there was this, once that happened, early 90s, things just kind of took off, to different types of phone scams, right? Phone frauds and blue boxes and red boxes and black boxes and all those types of things. So the crimes were becoming much more sophisticated. And by the time I did my almost 7 years in training and protection, I got back to field assignment. Things were starting to really take off. And that's, as a supervisor, I was able to supervise squads that worked these types of crimes. I was selected to head our office in Frankfurt, Germany. So 2005 to 2008, worked with a lot of foreign governments and helping them help us and vice versa on crimes, because now cyber crimes became transnational.
Yeah.
If it wasn't, you'd have crews or teams of folks that were traveling across Europe, credit card fraud, but where they get the information from. And then I also remember that, the time that we got a call and a couple of folks in our office responded to the incident in Estonia. Okay. When they were shut down
Yeah.
through a hack. So the world was transforming digitally. So think about this. Think about movies, right? Movies,
Yeah.
VHR, Netflix, version 1, right? They used to mail you the DVD.
DVDs. Yeah.
Now streaming. This is the way the transformation of technology and business has obviously opened up, the avenues for folks to capitalize in a criminal way on those types of things. So you can't. So now, Sean, there's no way you can avoid any investigation that doesn't involve a digital piece of information.
Right. Yep.
I mean, so look at chip and pin technology, or even just your credit card, right? When you have to sign your name when you're buying something, if you do, at a retail establishment, that signature it's worthless.
Yeah.
Right? There's no imprint. So things have changed a lot, but we still have people still write checks. So that's where the kind of cyber came. And then, for my time in Germany, then came back to Newark again, I really saw that there was a problem. The problem was that small to mid-sized businesses were at risk, more so. I can't say more so than the bigger companies. We've had this conversation before about the big ones, JP Morgan Chases and what they spend. But it was car dealerships, it was family businesses, and these types of things still are, I think, inordinately at risk.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And the bigger it's, we kind of say there's a haves and have-nots. So I saw a lot of that, when I was here in Newark, and that's really why I decided to get into this field, to use that investigative knowledge, learn about technology, partner with folks, understand the insurance piece of this, technology piece of this, the legal piece of this, the data privacy piece of this, because it's such a diffuse, interesting area that it just falls into so many different things, federal regulations, state regulations. To me, it was very exciting, and it's been my pleasure to serve clients when they have problems. And we always would love to do assessments and head off these issues, right? But oftentimes there's situations, and we get to use our investigative skills. And I have a small team of folks, but we work with a lot of other people out there that are very good at this too, because it's such a diffuse business that no one person or a business has all the technology, and they can't all do it themselves.
Yeah.
So it kind of goes back on this whole Secret Service thing with cooperation, working with specialists and technologists and people who are good at what they do and passionate about it, and trying to solve problems, often in a very short period of time.
Well, I mean, if everybody goes and checks the other playlist called Everything Cyber, it's just Jim and me talking about particular topics. And you will notice a common theme of all those videos is our frustration that we can't find teams to sort of work together to solve some of these things, because we do have an idea of how to solve it, but it takes so many different players that, it's not going to happen. But at least we put it out there to the universe that maybe someday the echoes of our voice a generation or two down the line will actually come back and, oh, I remember when Jim and Sean talked about this. This is what we can do. And so you've always been that. As long as I've known you, you've always been about a sort of, well, here's the team, and this is what the team's going to do. It's never about the one person.
It can't be, and I really enjoy that. I really enjoy having relationships where I can refer somebody, or I have a question, and I don't look. Your field has become much more complicated than it was 5 years ago.
Sure.
And I thought I had a handle on it at one point. I sure don't now, right? But that's great to be able to have someone like your call. And I think the government is also, what I've seen is their evolution. They've also decided that there's in-house folks that they can train, right, and get better and do certain things. But they also rely on private industry and partnerships,
right,
as well. And I think, one of the things we had talked about before this was, how do we combat this cyber issue? And I think it's public-private partnerships, which we've talked about a lot. It's the criminals don't care where they're sitting. They don't care what language they're speaking. They don't care what their affiliation is with anything other than you got a skill, I got a skill. Let's put this together and figure out how we can make this work.
Right.
There's no NDAs. There's no and in the government, it's much even more difficult to get information from other states and countries. It requires much more legal paperwork and can be an impediment sometimes to getting a result. That's why it takes so long for these investigations.
And that's what I wanted to ask you about. It's because, I mean, we see the story, the general public sees the story long after the fact. And you may have been in there for months, in some cases years, to a certain extent. When you look back on your investigations, do you think, and I mean, everybody looks at the government as being this all-knowing entity and what have you, and all-powerful, but it's actually, you mentioned it just in passing before, there are limitations, there's legal limitations. And you don't impress me as being one of the cowboys on the TV shows or the movies or whatever that say, oh, to hell with the Constitution, we're going this way. And so when you look back at investigations, how does an investigation at the Secret Service work in the cyber world?
Yeah, I think there's, it's much more difficult because venue is really everywhere and it's nowhere, and you think jurisdictional boundaries would apply, and it does apply in some cases, but for the most part, you're crossing jurisdictions all the time. And I saw that very early in my career, is that, I could, even if I'm in Arizona and someone's driving in from California and they've got credit cards, okay, or if someone's in Arizona and they're hacking a computer in Texas, I mean, you really have to have these cross-jurisdictional cooperation within your agency. So it requires a lot of coordination. And I think the Secret Service has done a very good job at coordinating, as they were once called, electronic crime task forces around the countries. So I can pick up the phone and call somebody in Denver and say, hey, look, let me talk to your guy in ECTF because I think we've got a situation I need some help with. Do you have a contact at blah, 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 blah? We need to understand what's happening here. Yeah. Are you guys working the same case we are? And then, so you're deconflicting within your own agency, and then oftentimes you're deconflicting outside your agency with other agencies, because a lot of people have jurisdiction over this crime, and it touches a lot of things. A piece of mail gets launched because of a cyber attack. It's the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, right? It's a financial transaction. It's, so you can vote Homeland Security investigations, Secret Service, IRS, because there's usually some sort of tax violation there. So you really need a team of 6, 7, 8 people to kind of put these cases together. And a lot of that is, deconflicting at a local level, at a headquarters level. And then at the end of the day, the U.S. attorney is usually the arbiter of that, of who's working the case, and who's the lead agency on this. And a lot of times, we'd work for the assistant, U.S. attorney and this case. Yeah. And that's where we kind of take our marching orders from, and just say, okay, you two guys, your agencies are both working on this case together. Okay, great. So, and we're always better together, but the evolution of those, and now we're talking about, okay, offices overseas. Well, and you get.
I was about to say, because everything you just talked about was domestic,
right?
But this is an international syndicate now, for lack of a better term.
Right. So that's it. Do you have a treaty? Do you have treaties with other countries to share information? If not, do you need to send a letter to the embassy? What are you specifically asking for? How do you get it? And that's why it takes so long.
Yeah.
So international cooperation has grown. You've got things like Europol and Interpol, and UK has its own group that does that. You really have to coordinate, and to cut down some of these impediments requires legal documents, agreements, and treaties and whatnot. there were times when we in Frankfurt, we get a phone call from the US. Hey, look, run out to the airport right now. There's somebody transiting through Frankfurt Airport. Okay, you guys have a warrant? We're going to get you the warrant. We have it. We're going to get it from San Diego. So we have a 9-hour time difference.
Right.
We're flying out. We're driving out to the airport, and this is where it helps to have German-speaking agents. And we're convincing the cops why they need to hold this guy.
Yeah.
Because I'm telling you, the piece of paper is coming. We've got it. We're just waiting for it. It's got to clear Interpol. It's got to clear whatever. And then, get the embassy involved or the consulate involved, and usually it gets a little smoother. But it's a lot of it's cop to cop stuff. Still, hey, look, this is, and, some countries are easy to work with than others, and some countries are not. So it takes a lot of people interested, focused, dedicated to do this. And it just takes time, but you should still cooperate with these agencies, because
I want to ask you, I'm going to interrupt you there, because I want to ask you this before I forget this question, which I have a habit to do, as people know on this, watching the channel. Do you still think back, when you were doing it, and when you think back, and when you look at everything going on now, do you have a sense of frustration with the likes of Russia, Eastern European countries, China, now South American countries that know they have a full-on hacking, organized crime syndicates all over their borders, but offer little to no help to bring those people to justice when they do something within the US?
I don't think frustration is really the right word.
Is there a stronger word, or is there?
I just think that, you got to know the rules, right? These are the rules, and these are the impediments, and you have to know how to get around them. And when you look at these types of things, you may not get cooperation from one country or one business, right? You may or may not. And that's just the way it is. The good guys have to play by the rules. The bad guys don't. Right. So you are already playing defense, right? But that's why it takes a little bit longer. So you can't get frustrated at something that you can't change, right? And I mean, there are times where, if it's in mutual interest, there might be cooperation, but those things are fought at such a high level. And so you try to do whatever's in your control, right, to get the situation that, in your favor. And sometimes it just takes patience, Sean, and persistence, and you're just going to have to hang in there. And that is definitely not something that we see, in the private sector.
Well, you're definitely more Zen than I am, because my Irish gets up every time I'm reading another story, and you just know. I mean, the authorities know exactly who it is. They just can't get to them.
And eventually they will. Eventually they will. It will happen.
The world has to change, and I think, and I want to ask you about that in a second, because actually, let me ask you about it now.
Sure.
In terms of what you were just saying about building a team and having patience, and the good guys having to play by the rules, do you envision a global cyber force where there's cooperation among countries, even ones who aren't cooperating right now? Or do you think, because within the domestic borders, these types of acts and what have you, as long as they're not done to homegrown people or companies, are basically looked at as, it's just cyber?
What global force do we have right now as an example?
I mean, the only thing I can think of, and I have problems with them and what have you, but it's the only one I can think of, is the World Health Organization.
Yeah, and we know that compliance is very difficult, right? It's just, I think, forcing any nation to do something, This sounds like some great utopian idea of
Yep,
a
it is.
planet is quickly approaching, the United States, I'm sorry, in the world, and it's going to crash into the earth and we all band together. Short of that.
Well, that's the whole premise of The Watchmen. So, that's.
Yeah, see, I only got past the first couple episodes. But see, I think that the thing is that you're going to continue to have this type of cooperation and a very shifting, um, patchwork. I mean, Sean, how about one data privacy regulation for the entire US?
Oh, wait a second now. Now you're getting into
Can we start there?
Now you're just pure Alice in Wonderland right now.
How about what happened to Safe Harbor? And come on, man, it's just not going to happen. But I can tell you that when push comes to shove, cooperation does happen. And it really depends on the expedience or the importance of the situation. I think the thing about cyber, I think this is much more difficult right now to say it's a crisis or a huge issue, is because we're talking about data and transfer of information, and it's dollars and cents. When we start getting into critical infrastructure, things like water, communications, transportation, we're entering another realm.
Right.
And I think when cyber becomes a kinetic problem, then I think that things will change.
Or it might be too late.
Man, you must watch a lot of movies because, yeah.
Well, I am going to ask you about one movie in particular because it is one of my favorite movies, but
okay.
I'll ask you about that. Well, no, let's finish up your story because we are approaching
almost we're pushing up on time.
On the hour mark and whatnot.
Yeah,
but you have a fascinating background. So you're in the cyber world. You're knee deep in investigations and what have you. Mm-hmm. When did you know it was time to be done with the Secret Service and to move on elsewhere?
Yeah, that's always a tough one. I think the first 20 years went really fast. The last 5 seemed to drag on a little bit, and I don't know particularly why. And I think there was a lot of things that happened the last few years. The government, this is personally my opinion, it became increasingly difficult to operate in an environment where continuing resolutions and budgets were up for grabs almost every period. It became difficult to operate, and sometimes it did become a little frustrating, right? And when you didn't have the resources or you had a particular vision, and I tried to move things around a lot when I was the head of our office here in New Jersey. I really said, look, we need to focus on cyber crimes and financial crimes, and we were able to do that. But we also had a lot of competing interests at that time. So, yeah, it's a tough question. I think long term and short, I felt it was time for a different challenge. And certainly, I think there's times when we all look back and we wish that maybe we would have stayed or done something different. That's a fleeting moment for me. But I think for me, I'm very happy in the decision. I was very interested in business, and as you know, yeah, what we do is we have skills and attributes. But at the end of the day, what we're doing is also business, right? Mm-hmm. And that is the hardest thing you'll ever do.
Yeah.
And I think it continues to be a challenge, one that I've embraced, one that I think about all the time. And every day you have the right product, the right service, the right client, the right time, right? And at the right price. I don't know if I said that one, but it's so challenging. It's such a challenging area. I really love business, and I love being part of a business that lets me be, who I am and entrepreneurial and try to solve people's problems, so it was just time for me, I think, after 25 years, to try something different. And
I mean, if people should get from this conversation, because again, you and I have had so many conversations that mm-hmm. I know some of this already, but that you essentially look at what you do now very similar to what you were doing before for the government, but you're not necessarily encumbered by all that being in the government entails.
Well, it's different,
So much, yeah.
the difference is, even in the government, there's not a blank check book. We had to make business decisions every day about resources, because we were also held to a standard that we had, that as an office, there were things that you could do, and that would raise the profile of your office. And to that fact, you want to have great cases. You wanted to have cases that were thorough, that were impactful, that help people, right? And that garnered some recognition from the U.S. Attorney's Office, from other agencies, and within your agency. And we talked about before. So we had to make a lot of business decisions about how many people to employ for this, what direction to take the office in, and how much time should we spend on this? Did we spend too much time on it? So we made a lot of those decisions, but at the end of the day, I don't think we looked at it from purely a dollars and cents perspective, right? But we would say, look, we've been working so long on this case, we put so many resources into it, we need to move on to something else. A lot of shifting, competing interests, things about mortgage fraud was something we had to focus on. If the Department of Justice or Department of Homeland Security or even the presidential directive said, you guys need to investigate this, then we would have to shift our response, towards that, right? So it's very similar to what I'm doing today. But today I do get to work with clients, and what I do is I'm able to help them directly. I'm not just going to show up here and say, okay, you got a problem. Give me, let's get that information, and then we'll take it away. Here, I think we can impact what clients do on a daily basis. And what I like to say is helping them make business decisions about risk, right?
Yep.
And it's a very finite thing, but sometimes the resolution or the mitigation isn't so predictable. It's never predictable, but I try to be as predictable as possible. There's a good chance it will happen. I can't make any guarantees. This is what it's going to cost. This is what you should hope to get back, as either, from a dollars and cents perspective or from a risk mitigation perspective, long-term, short-term. So it's a little bit more interactive with clients here, where there may be a threat actor, but it's really not the focus unless it's an insider threat. Then that's a different situation. That probably comes the closest to what we would do in the government. Working with our attorneys, coming up with information, resources, so that they can help their clients make decisions. That's really kind of what I still enjoy. But again, we always had resources to manage and choices to make. Now it happens, and it happens pretty quickly. And you know what? We can get boots on the ground pretty quickly. We can get involved in a case pretty quickly now. But scaling, as you know, can be difficult sometimes if you get too busy. So
sure.
But that's the Secret Service or any federal agency. Everybody's always doing something. Just because something walks in the door right now doesn't mean that you can't just always drop everything.
Yeah. Yep.
That's business too, though, right?
Oh, so, yeah. I mean,
so I think there is I think what I did before and now is so similar. And I hope that the clients that I work with understand that, trusted advisor, and for me, it's all about really trust and confidence, right? I'm not going to try to sell something that I can't do. I'm not going to make promises that, about things that can't happen, because as you know, in cyber or anything outside, there are no guarantees. Things shift all the time.
Yeah.
Every day. Right.
Well, just during this conversation, something probably shifted somewhere.
Something shifted, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what's important for a business today might not be important for business tomorrow. There's competing interests all the time. It's very operational, and that's hopefully the things that we do and you and I do will help businesses be more resilient and grow. Right. At the end of the day, if we can help them grow by mitigating risk in some way, shape, or form, I think we've done our jobs.
Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to leave it there because that's a good way to cap it, except I do have one final question. But you know what? I even learned some stuff here about your career in the Secret Service that I did not know about. So it was I hope people have an appreciation for the kind of dedication that most of the people have who join agencies and whatnot, and the sacrifices that they do have to make.
Mhm.
So when it comes to certain professions, I like to take the myth out of it and put the reality in it. However, sometimes pop culture does put something out there that I truly love, and I don't want to ruin my memory of it, but I am going to give you a shot to tell me whether or not I should continue to enjoy this movie. But In the Line of Fire is one of my favorite movies with
Mhm.
Clint Eastwood and John Malkovich.
Okay.
Good, bad, ugly, or just, you know what, take it as entertainment. Good, bad, ugly in terms of its portrayal of the Secret Service, or just take it as entertainment and stop overthinking.
You know, Sean, I don't want to tarnish the sheen right now on the Secret Service by debunking any particular movie or you know, perception that anybody would have. There are a number of movies to watch, and in training division, I call it the Secret Service collection, right?
Really?
They were DV, they were VH.
VHS.
God, can you believe that? I can't remember VHS.
It took me a second. It took me a second. It's because you got it wrong that I got it right off the bat.
Because DVD, VHS, there were probably DVDs and VHSs.
Yeah.
But I would have various clips that I would use because there's parts of those movies that are all pretty good. Day of the Jackal is not a Secret Service movie, but a great movie. Ronin, another one that was in my collection. Driving Miss Daisy. That's the one there's a lot of, downtime there. Let's just take the drama. Besides the drama, I think a lot of those movies, of course, had folks from the Secret Service who retired and helped them write it. So, yeah, there's some stuff in there. Live and Die in LA, right? That's the one I probably watched over and over again.
Yeah, I love that movie. That's an underrated movie.
Great movie, right?
Yes.
William Patterson, right? William Dafoe.
Peterson. Yeah.
Right. Great movie. The whole thing with the chips and the counter-currency and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's a collection out there of those types of movies. But I don't watch that kind of stuff, man. I really don't.
Okay.
It's just.
Well, you lived it, so why do you have to watch it?
I watch movies about insurance consultants. There's
nobody does that. Nobody.
They're great. They're riveting.
Yeah. Yeah. Here, let me show you this specimen. I'm going to send you a specimen, a cyber insurance specimen to read. You tell me how riveting that is.
I just love to compare the different contracts and coverage and policies, and man, it's fascinating stuff.
Now everybody knows that Jim Mottola has a dry sense of humor. Too.
No, but anyway, I don't think this. I would seriously. Everything that I said today is something you could certainly learn more about on those National Geographic.
Yes, yeah, I watch those quite often because there is a good inside look at what they can make public. Obviously,
it is true, and I think that whatever I said today, times 10, you will be able to pick up on all that stuff, and and a lot of walking around in dress shoes and suits
on some pretty uncomfortable weather days, I'm sure too. So
yeah, I'm not a big fan of the rain, but yes, there's a lot of that. So anyway, so that was your question about movies. That was it.
That was it. I love that. And I'll be honest with you, To Live and Die in LA probably is right up there within the line of fire. Because then William Peterson, pre-CSI Day, goes on to do Manhunter, which is the first appearance of Hannibal Lecter.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Brian Cox played Lecter in that movie before Anthony Hopkins did in Silence of the Lambs. So,
see, Succession. Now that's the kind of stuff that I like to watch.
There you go.
That's about business, right? That's really interesting stuff. And and that kind of stuff. And Brian Cox, amazing.
Oh yeah. He's fantastic. And now he's the voice of McDonald's. So go figure.
No one's asking us to sell,
No,
fish fillets or,
they're just asking us to solve the world's business problems. That's
Yeah,
it.
Sean, it's always a pleasure to work with you because we're always trying to help people and solve their problems. Yeah,
That
and
we are.
it's for profit, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a business, right? And you got to monetize what you can do at some point.
But we're also trying to entertain them while we're doing it. Because I mean, let's be honest, this was good conversation.
Yeah, no, these are always good, but it's a pleasure. But yeah, I mean, those movies, I don't know, man.
Okay, well, I'm going to enjoy them anyway. I just won't tell you.
You enjoy them, right? And then we can talk offline about,
Other stuff.
we can roll through and I can criticize every frame by frame.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll do that. Maybe we'll do an episode. We'll do a video of that. Everybody's been doing these live, reviews of movies as they're running. Maybe we'll do that. Maybe we'll live stream it and whatnot. I'll see if I can get the rights to do that.
I think I still have a VHS player, and
that would be classic.
And I have it. I believe I still have a few of these.
Okay.
In VHS form, so we can listen to them spinning.
All right. Well, I have the very original Star Wars trilogy still in VHS, not the one that George Lucas redid. The very original movies. I'm never getting rid of those. So.
All right, Sean.
Anyway, hey, Jim, this was a pleasure. Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. You've been watching another episode of Did You Know That? ? I really want to thank everybody for participating in the channel, whether you're subscribed, whether you like, whatever you do, it helps the channel, but those buttons below will really help the channel. So just make sure that you click them when you can. And just remember, we're going to have new episodes or new content every Thursday. So for Jim Mottola, my name is Sean O'Rourke. Until the next time, everybody out there, you take care. Jim, I'll talk to you soon.
Take care, Sean. Thank you.
Bye.